Okay, so we're continuing in Perek Hazov, and we're going to pick up on Mem Vav Amid Aleph. Mem Vav Amid Aleph. Now, just briefly, we moved from the question of whether money can be used for chalipin to whether money can be the object of chalipin. That was how we introduced Rav Papa. Because Rav Papa was the one who said, that you can use money for chalipin, and he wanted to bring several rayas. And then the Gemara came out and said, Elav shmamina ein matbea nikna b'chalipin shmamina. So about 10, 12 lines from the top, after the Gemara tried several attempps at proving Rav Papa's point that even though there was a machlokes, Rav and Levi, whether or not money can be used in chalipin, but l'chayra, money as an object of chalipin should not have been as complicated. But the Gemara slugged up the rayas and came back and said that you cannot use money as one of the objects of chalipin. Okay, so that's where we're holding. So now, says the Gemara, and this is about a dozen lines maybe from the top. In the middle of the line says V'afra Papa. So the Gemara now comes back and says, Rav Papa Hadave. So Rav Papa, who was the one who proposed the idea that money can be one of the objects of chalipin, not to use it as chalipin, but one of the objects in the trade, he stood by that. The Gemara comes back and says, no, Rav Papa recanted. Rav Papa is now saying that you can't. And take a look at Rashi around the a little bit past the halfway point of the narrower lines. It says, "Va'afra Papa Hodabe mimai da'ama matbea nachla niknas b'chalipin." Even Rav Papa is recanting from what he had said, that a matbeya, that a coin can be acquired through chalipin as one of the two items of exchange. So he took that staunch position, he proved it, he wanted to prove it, and it was slugged up. Now he comes back and says, I'm defeated. I'm willing to concede that you can't. Why? Why does he say that? You heard Rav Papa, because there was this incident with Rav Papa, Havale Tracer Alfe Dinre Bechazoi. He had 12,000 dinrin by the Bechazoi. Bechazoi must have been a big enterprise in the town of Bechazoi, and he had 12,000 on deposit, or there was a loan. It wasn't clear what that money was, but he wanted to retrieve that money, and he was in another town. So what did he do? Rav Shmuel Ba'acha was going to the town of Bechazoi. So he wanted to tell Rav Shmuel Ba'acha, you acquire it for me. Okay, so in other words, that's the scenario. And now the Gemara is going to tell us, so how did he acquire it? Because the people who owed him the money or who held it for him in Bechazoi, Rashi will tell us, this is a big sum of money. They didn't want to just give it to Stamazai, to someone, and then at the end of the day, if he loses or something, then Rav Papa is going to be able to claim it. So somehow, Rav Papa wanted Rav Shmuel Ba'acha to sort of control the money. So what did he do? So what he did was he transferred the money. Rav Papa transferred the money to Rav Shmuel Ba'acha agav asifa de besa. So what he did was he essentially made a kinyan agav. Now remember what we talked about. The kinyan agav is where something metaltalin, something movable, is attached to a transaction involving karka, real property. Agav, meaning on the back of, or so you make the transaction, and agav, you transfer the metaltalin, and that's a absolutely proven way of being able to transfer ownership, if you will, between one person and another, is through kinyan agav. So what did he do? So what did Rav Papa do with Rav Shmuel Bar Acha? He went ahead and he said, "I'm making a kinyan agav. You're going to go ahead and Rashi says agav v'knina l'Rav Shmuel." He was going there. Kadeshi Yovim lo, lo hikna lo lo min hapikadon. Because if Rav Shmuel Bar Acha hadn't had ownership of that money or whatever, the people down there would not have given it to him. Shim yavdu b'derech yachzer Rav Papa yitavim lo, because they were afraid that if he was just a shaliach and he lost the money, then Rav Papa would come back to those folks in Beit Chazor and say, "Give me my money." So they wanted to know with certainty that Shmuel Bar Acha was in control, which means Rav Papa had to give him control of the money. So what did he do? He gave him control. Agavasifa the basis of Rashi. Miftan Beso, the opening, the threshold of the opening of his house, that's what he transferred ownership. Alma, Agav Karka, since Rav Papa was transferring the ownership of that money through the kinyan of that karka, of that opening, the miftam, the opening of the house. Shema mina emet ben nasek chalipin. Why didn't he simply transfer the money with chalipin? In other words, why didn't Rav Papa say, "Here's a kinyan sudar, right? I mean, a handkerchief or some other item. Let's make a kinyan, and I'm going to transfer ownership of that money to you. The money that's down in Beit Chazoi, you're going to be the owner of that money." That's a simple way of giving him control of the money through chalipin. But the Gemara says he didn't do that. Is a raya that Rav Papa didn't hold of it. Rav Papa, who said that you can transfer money as an item of chalipin, that would have been the simple way to do it. He didn't do it. Instead, he did it with a kinyan agav. Says the Gemara, also nafik le'ape atuvach. When the transaction went through and Rav Shmuel Bar Acha was coming back, so he ran out to greet him, to thank him for sort of liberating his 12,000 dinrim, which was stuck down there. Anyway, the point of the Gemara is that Rav Papa himself wasn't comfortable with a kinyan chalipin. So if Rav Papa is saying that money can be one of the two items, we can trade money for something else, in this case a sudar or whatever it was, then okay. So that's Rav Papa now recanting on his own svara that money can be used for chalipin. Says Rashi. Okay, we said okay, fine. So now we've come full circle. Rav Papa tried to say that money can be one of the items of chalipin. We slugged him up, and Rav Papa says, "I agree that I am not that it can't be." So now the Gemara wants to further support that view. It says, Ula, the great Amora, also said, Chalipin. Also, he's making the point that a Madeya cannot be one of the items of Chalipin. So you have three of the leading Amoraim who all concur in the view that money cannot be one of the items of Chalipin. Okay? So now we're going to set the stage where the Gemara is going to go even further. Rashi says, "Hi, v'chein le'el apligi de Rav v'Levi." The v'chein, he's saying, because Ula also weighed in on the machlokes between Rav and Levi, which we had earlier. Remember, we had the machlokes whether or not money can be one of the can be used for the chalipin, not to be one of the items in the trade, but used for the trade. That was the machlokes Rav and Levi, which we had in the previous Gemara, and Ula weighed in. So the Gemara says, "V'chein oma Ula," that now Ula is weighing in on this machlokes as well. He weighed in on the first machlokes, and now he's weighing in on the second machlokes. That's why it says "V'chein," also and also, meaning that Ula is taking a stake in both machlokes, because the machlokes Rav and Levi was strictly on whether or not you can use a coin as a modus of chalipin. Our machlokes is now whether the coin itself can be chalipin, whether you can exchange a coin in chalipin, not use it as a transactional piece. Two separate machlokes. And it would seem originally we thought for a papa that you can't use it as part of the chalipin, but it can be the subject of chalipin. And now we see that a papa we can't, so says it can't even be the subject of chalipin because he brings a raya because he used the kinyan agav instead of using chalipin. All right, so now we have all of this weight on the side of Eimad Be'er Nasa Chalipin. All the heavyweights come out and say that. Okay. Now the Gemara lures us into this. Now that we've said that, Eisvei Rav Abba. Rav Abba, now that everybody says that you can't do it, so then he brings a shaila from a brisa. The brisa, it's in Masechus Kedushin, as follows. So Asa Rav Abba Ula. So he specifically addressed it to Ula, but it would apply to the other Amoraim as well because they all say the same thing. A person had, he had donkey drivers and horse riders and calf riders. He had all kinds of people under his employee, and he went into the marketplace. And he wanted to buy food for them because they were all coming along. So he went into the shuk, and he went to a money changer. Remember what we said, that in those days they had sort of a hierarchy of money, and when they have dinrim, the gold dinrim, then those were worth more money. You didn't go in and buy a sandwich or an apple or something for a gold dinner because it's like taking a $1,000 bill and buying a candy bar. I mean, you don't do that. So what you do is you go to the money changer, and the money changer breaks down the larger bill into smaller monies, and which we said earlier, we've already said that. And you take that small money. Remember, we did it with Masa Sheni, that he wanted to have loose change around so that he could buy a meal or two when he came to Yerushalayim. He didn't want to break a big bill, so he broke it with a shulchan. So here he went to the shulchan, to the money changer, and he said, "Ten li bediner mos va'afarnasei. Give me money in exchange for a dinner, va'afarnasei, and I will supply food for them. In other words, I'll give them to eat." Okay.
Excuse
then
me.
He said, "There's important vani ela lacha yefei dinner v'trisus v'mor sheyeshli v'beisi." And then I will, he says to the money changer, and then I will give you. Now, here it becomes a little questionable. What does the Gemara mean when it says yefei dinner? L'chayre, it means yafeh, from the word yafeh, beautiful. As I'll give you a beautiful dinner, v'trisus, and trisus is a smaller coin worth only a fraction of a dinner. So I'll give you that in exchange for, in other words, you're going to break this dinner for me now. You break it down into let's say prutos, pennies or copper or whatever, and I'm going to give you fay dinner v'trisus mimor sheyeshli b'beisi. But I have money in the house, which I don't have with me, and I'm going to give you money in exchange for that. So now, okay, that's the scenario. So right away, it conjures up several questions. Let's see.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Somehow, with my distractions, I lost the place. Can you redirect me?
Yeah, sure. We just started the Ace of A, which is about, let's just say, in the daf, it's about a little bit past halfway. It says Ace of Rav Abba Ula.
On Mem Vav Amid Aleph?
Mem Vav Amid Aleph.
Okay.
Ace of Rav Abba Ula. So now that Ula said, you see it. You see where there's a little gimel in brackets.
Yeah.
Right above that, at the end of the line, Esvei. Right.
Thank you.
So Ula and the other Amoraim just got through saying that Eimad Be'er Nasa Chalipin. We cannot use a coin, as you can't exchange a coin for an item in Chalipin. You can't do it. Because it's money. We'll see why, but you can't do it. So, and Ula says, so now Rav Abba says, wait a minute, Ula. I have a question for you. You're saying you can't do it. If he was taking his crew of drivers, horse drivers, and other donkey drivers and whatever, and he had to feed them. Here is a dinner, which was the typical way of doing it. He says, I have a dinner, and I want to buy them all some food. So you break it for me into smaller coins so that I can take the smaller coins into the marketplace, the shuk, and I can buy them all dinner. Okay? Now, how am I going to pay you? Because you're going to do this exchange for me that costs money. He says, I'm going to pay you mimol sheishli bibesi. Right? Yefei dinner v'trisus, I'm going to give you a beautiful dinner. Dinar, not dinner, that's food, but dinar. But trisus, and trisus is a smaller coin it's a fraction value. So he's going to give, he's going to give him more than what he's getting. He's getting the exchange for a dinner, and he's going to give them a dinner and a trisus. Okay, but I have it in the house. So what's the first thing you think of when you think about this? You say, this sounds like ribbis. You're going to lend me 25 exchange, let's say, what is it, 25 coppers for a dinner, let's say, and I'm going to give you a dinner and a trisus. That sounds like a classic case of ribbis. So that's what the Gemara is worrying about here. What about this scenario? So Rashi says, Tainli bedina mos, tainli prutos b'shava dinner, says Rashi. Rashi is about 4 lines from the wide lines. Give me prutos, pennies, copper pennies, equal to a dinner. V'hadinner ain't ato biyadi, but I don't have that dinner in my hand to give you. By, let's say, Tuesday of this week, I will come back and pay you yefei dinner v'trisus, a beautiful yefei dinner, if that's what again, we don't know what the word means yet. Yefei dinner v'trisus, I'll pay you. Because all kedanach dinner yafer hayotze b'hatzor ka'amar. In other words, he means a dinner yofer, meaning a nicer dinner that came off the the hot press, the mint. But trisus is meya katana, is a smaller coin, so he's going to give him this money in exchange. I'll find the same, says Rashi, I'll take care of the needs of my drivers. Kolomar asalkem elai kol tzarech sipuk kri parnosa. Okay, so he means, in other words, I have smaller money that I can pay them their wages or buy them food so that they have what to eat. So now, and then I'll pay you. So on the surface, what's the problem? It sounds okay, except it may appear to be ribbis. Why? Because he's giving him. It looks like the money changer is lending him, because the money changer gets paid. Money changer doesn't loan money. He sells money. He's in the sales business. Sales typically does not involve ribbis. Lending involves ribbis. But l'chara, on the surface, this looks like he is lending him the money, and the fellow says, yeah, I have the money at home and I'll come and pay you. But I'm going to pay you more than the value of what you're giving me, because you're giving me a dinner. I'm giving you a dinner and a trisus. And a nicer dinner at that. But let's just say a dinner for a dinner and trisus. Says the Gemara as follows. In Yeshlo Mos, if he has the money sitting in his house, it's already there, mutter. It's permitted for him to make this exchange with the shofani, the money changer. Then we'll have aser. And if not, it's aser. So now it depends on whether or not that money is already in his house or not. Why is that important? And again, we had this scenario in the Gemara previously in Daf Mem Hey. Remember that the classic case of ribbis was saw b'saw, right? If a person borrowed a saw of grain and he returned a saw of grain, so the Gemara says you shouldn't do that because the value of the grain may go up, and since it is a chayfetz, it's an object, and objects do fluctuate. Money doesn't fluctuate, remember. but objects fluctuate. So if she gives him back the same saw, and that saw increased the value, that's ribis, because now that saw has more value. But the Gemara said, if saw besaw, if you exchange it to him, but it was a question of convenience because he had the saw already in his house, then it's not a loan, because it's just a question of delaying the payment that he already has. So the Gemara makes a very important difference as whether saw besaw is a loan or whether it's just he has it in his house, but he can't give it to him at that moment, so he borrows the saw and gives him right back the saw. So what do we see from that Gemara? That if he has it in his possession, it's not considered ribis. Only if he doesn't have it, has to acquire it, and then he gives it back to him, then it's ribis.
But Rabbi,
So fine difference, right?
Rabbi, why do we focus so much on whether he had it or not? If he decides that he's going to get it and pay it whatever way he does, and he decides to give him a gift on top of what he owes him, why can't it be classified like that? Why do we have to look at it so that, does he have it in his possession or not? Does he have to take an oath that he has it in his possession? I mean, it just seems like too much.
And it's a good question, but the fact of the matter is that when we're dealing in Mekach and Memker in commerce, we don't accept the concept of a gift. The concept of a gift, when I'm transacting business with you, doesn't come into the picture. I know it's a nice thing, I'm giving you a gift, but that's not how the world looks at it. The world looks at it, we're transacting business. This is business, my friend. This is not pleasure, you and I.
Yeah, but it's not Marasayan. If the guy says, look, I really appreciate your waiting, and this is on me. I'm not, it's not extra. I just want to thank you. I don't understand why that can't be a gift.
I think that the Rabbanan created a siyag. The Rabbanan created Mita Araisa. You may be right; it's not ribis, but because the Raisa, the standard for ribis is much more difficult. But the Rabbanan lowered the standard and said, you know what? We're going to say something is ribis if it even appears to be in the parsha of ribis. Why? Because we don't want Jews lending to each other for profit. We want that to be an act of tzedakah, an act of charity, that if I'm lending you money, I'm doing it because it's the Torah tells us you have to give tzedakah, and I don't want to be caught in that vise. Now, you're right. You can speak it out, and if you speak it out, then that trumps everything, so to speak. But the Torah is telling us that let's just go. This is a monetary transaction. This isn't a friendly, I'll do something for you, you do something for me. So midrabanan, if it appears to be ribis, even though you may call it a gift, Michael, it's ribis. That's really the point of this. What the Gemara is telling us is that ribis midrabanan is so important that we won't even confuse it for a gift. So if two people are transacting and I'm watching this and I don't hear what you're saying to the guy, here, I'm a good friend, I'll give you a gift. I'm watching this and I see what appears to be ribis. That maris ayin of ribis is what the Chachamim are saying you have to be very careful for. So in our scenario, when he's giving him this dinner plus the tresus, that appears to be ribis. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. If he has the money already in his house, he's not borrowing, he's just saying, you know what, give me a break, I have to get to the house. These folks need to eat right now, trade the dinner for me, and I'll go get it and I'll give it to you. So in other words, it isn't a question of I'm borrowing it or not borrowing it. Says the Gemara, that's okay. But if he doesn't have it and he has to go ahead and acquire it, that's a real case of borrowing, and that's the case of ribis. That's why the Gemara makes that distinction between whether he has it in his house or if he doesn't have it in his house.
So, Rabbi, can he turn that into a sale rather than an exchange at that point?
Yes, and we're going to be going there in a minute, right? In other words, we're going to say that this is a sale, not a halva, because ribis doesn't apply to a sale, maybe. So you're touching that subject, which is valid, because if it's a sale, then it's treated differently. So hold that thought for a minute. We're going to get there. But,
excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
It's what I thought I heard you say to Michael's question was that the minute it cuts over the possible Morris Iron, that's why the Rabbanim were afraid of doing this. But privately, like Michael was saying, they're just having an exchange. Nobody's watching it. I mean, you can't assume that everybody's watching everybody all the time.
Right.
This is just an event between two people standing next to each other. There's no, you have to be on top of the coins in order to say, oh,
right.
This looks like ribbons.
Right. But the
Why would Rabbanan use that
no.
Morris Iron as such a strong justification for you can't do anything that could appear to be blah blah blah.
I think that what the Chazal wanted to do, they wanted to create one standard that everybody could live by, and therefore objectively, you're right. Subjectively, you could say this was not an all Maris, this was not an all ribbons, without question. But objectively, the Chachamim had to say we have to create a system where people will know what's ribbons. So we're going to say as follows: Midarais, it's okay, but we the Rabbanan are going to create a siyag. Well, what's the siyag? That when you're involved in mekach and memker, if you're involved in just a non-business relationship, I would agree with you. Business relationship, I'm giving you a gift, you're giving me a gift. Okay, but we see, and I see this as a practical matter, is that people who are medaktik halacha sometimes have said, and I've seen this, they said, no, wait a minute, let's be careful here. I don't want this to look like ribbons. So someone said in the course of a transaction, he said those words. He said, I don't want this to look like ribbons. Why? Because he's astute enough to know that when it comes to mekach memker, when it comes to business, we are ultra careful not to make something look like business. The whole shaila about whether or not you say thank you, or you have an excessive, effusive, warm feeling to somebody. People interpret that as ribbis. They're being very careful. Right. That may be a little bit over the top. I'm not saying it isn't.
In this case here, excuse me, the observer has to first understand what's going on, that they're doing a transaction and it's not something else. And then, so he has to determine that. And on top of that, then he starts worrying about ribbis. It's not a direct thing. It's something that the observer would have to derive with limited knowledge. He's not standing there. If it's a third person standing there is one thing, but if there's two people alone doing this conversation out of anywhere on the street,
right?
It can't happen that way.
Right. So what I would say is as follows. Ribbis has two edges to it, two sides to the coin. There is the Maris Ayin part of it, which I will concede is something we have to be careful about. But again, I mean, how far down the road do you go to avoiding Maris Ayin when you and I are just having a friendly exchange and someone might be watching? Okay, so I'm going to say that Maris Ayin, you got to be careful. You don't have to go crazy, but you got to be careful. But forget about the Maris Ayin portion. Let's talk about you and I as businessmen. We're businessmen. We're in a room alone. Nobody's watching. And I'm going to give you I'm going to lend you an item, and you're going to pay me back. You and I are both righteous people. There's no one watching, no one's going, and we want to do it right. So what are we going to do? I'm going to lend you this. I'm going to lend you this money, and I'm going to say you'll pay me back. Now, what are you paying me back? If you're paying me back the same money that I lent you, no problem, because you and I, not the third Maris Ayin person, you and I know we've done it right. I lent you the money, you pay me back the money, no problem. But if I say to you, I'm going to lend you this money because you need it to feed your people, and you say to me, that's great, I'm going to give you back your money, but I'm also going to give you a little kicker. Now, forget about Maris Ayin. That's you and I transacting, and you're giving me ribbis. Forget about no one watching. The Rebbe Shalom is watching. No one is watching. It's ribbis. Now, says the Gemara, wait a minute. It's not ribbis. It's not ribbis if I say to you, can you give me the 25, can you cash me this thing? And I'm paying you back such and such. I'm paying you back. I'm telling you right now that I'm going to give you this dinner and a tracer because I have the money. I just don't have access to it right now when I want to feed my people. So how about we do this? Says the Gemara, that's not ribbis. That's exempt from ribbis because this little catch that I'm not borrowing it for the sake of what you and I would consider of lending and borrowing. I'm just getting an advance on the money until I get my hands on it. And remember, there's this famous line in the Gemara, which we're going to quote, that, I have to get it because of Achiyova B'ni or Achiyemtza B'mafteach. There's that line in the Gemara that, you know what, my son has the key to the box. He's coming down the road. Give me 10 minutes. He'll come with the key. I'll open the box and give you the money. That's not ribbis, says the Gemara. If you're just telling him, I just need a couple of minutes to get my money together, that's already a different parsha. Now you could say, wait a minute, but it is. But again, the Gemara is nuancing this very, very careful for us to understand in the greater scheme of things, when you and I will do business after we close the Gemara and we're doing business, and you and I are going to say, wait a minute, what is the halacha of ribbis? Again, the halacha I'm using loosely. What is the halacha of ribbis? If I borrow the money and I pay you back more, that's ribbis. But I'm not borrowing. I don't use the word borrow when I have the money and it's just in a box that my son has to give me the key to open the box. So that's the subtlety that the Gemara is telling us. That's not ribbis.
So nowadays, when somebody says, I'm paying you back for exactly what you said, but keep the change. That's a very common term
right
in our culture.
Right.
Keep the change automatically goes into ribbis questions.
You got to be careful when you say keep the change, and as part of a halva, then again we'll have to look at the halacha and see what the halacha says in so many words. But yes, conceptually, what you just said is a problem with ribbis because it looks like you're benefiting from that loan. And again, why are we so hung up on ribbis? Why are we so hung up on this issue of one Jew not having to? Again, in the times when the Gemara was being reviewed and looked at, it could well have been that there were many poor Jews who literally had the shirt on their back, and if they needed some money, then Chazdei Hashem, those people who have the money, which, by the way, as we all know, in general terms, is not your money, it's the Rebbeinu Shalom's money. So you're just a shliach for the Rebbeinu Shalom. Rebbeinu Shalom wants you to be a good shliach. Take my money, says the Rebbeinu Shalom, and give it to Yitzchak. And Yitzchak will pay you back. Don't worry about it. But don't make money on my money. We have this thing, lahavdil, in the law, when you many contracts, not everyone, but many contracts have a clause that says we're doing this transaction, but you can't benefit from this transaction with a third person. I have to be involved. In other words, I am giving you money to do something. You can't take the money and start lending it and making profit on my back, because the clause says if you're going to use that money to make money, I'm your shittif. The originator of the money. And that has to do with landlords a lot, where landlords allow a tenant to sublease, but if he subleases and he makes more money on the sublease, then the landlord has to be a shittif in that money. You can't, the guy can't do it. That's very standard in many of our contracts. If that's the case, then the here is the same thing. But the Rebbeinu Shalom is saying, I don't want you to be the beneficiary of my money. It's my money. I gave it to you as a picadon. You're lending it to the other guy. Give it to the other guy. He'll pay you back, and I'll take care of you. I'll make sure that you are the beneficiary of your tzidkis. But don't do it on his back. That's the whole inyan of ribbis. So midoraisa, the standard isn't that high. The Chachamim came along and said, you know what? we really want to protect this Indian of ribbis, so we're going to be more stringent. So what we talk about very often in the Gemara is not midoraisa, it's midorabanan. It's the rabbinical edict on top of what the Torah says. This is how you should treat ribbis. So it seems like we're being pickiyun, but we're not. We're being subtle, and we're saying, like Michael asked, well, it's a matana, and you're right. It could very well be a matana. So why do you treat it as ribbis? The teretz is, and I'm going to say maris ayin, but the teretz is that, if you and I are just locked in a room, and I say to Michael, I want to give you a gift of this. That's ribbis? No, I can give you a gift. I can make you're a friend. You've done this for me and everything else. We're going to do a little exchange, but I'm going to give you a gift. Okay, so fine. I'll give you a gift. It's okay. But that's in the narrower picture. In the larger picture, that gift is in the course of Mekach and Memker. That gift looks too much like part of a transaction that the Chachamim say, don't do it. Don't do it because it will look like ribbis. So
reduced to its simplest terms, if you loan somebody $5 and then he's paid back with the same $5, a month later, that $5 is not worth the same amount as the original $5. There was gain or loss in the process without intentionality. It just happens.
Except one important factor, which we said before, is that in a monetary transaction, there's no ribbis because money
is the standard. Period.
Money is the standard. So it's only a payra, a product, something that is a non-money item that goes up and down in value. That's where the ribbis is. But you're right. If inflation occurs in the weeks that I lent you the money, and the $5 is now, $5.25 or whatever it happens to me, and I give you back, that's okay because it's money for money. And we don't look into the money and say, oh, what's the value of the money? We look into the value of a product. If I sold you a bushel of strawberries and then a month later the bushel of strawberries changed in value, that's where the ribbis comes in, is because the value of the product has changed, not the value of the money. And that's been the standard by which we have.
Is it because other things are less volatile? Considered less volatile than money, than currency, or what's the difference?
The difference is because the Torah says that money is something that everybody uses every single day. We can't concern ourselves with the money going up, the money going down. That'll happen all the time. I think it's more of a to prevent the chaos of the marketplace. If you're dealing in money, don't worry about it. Money is money. I'll give you 5, you give me 5. The 5 is not worth 5. It's okay. But once you start transacting in items, products, fungible stuff, that's where ribbis comes in. That's where you have to be particularly careful as not to pay back. Anyway,
Rabbi, 2 additional comments, one on the case in the Gemara and one as a general principle. So in the case where the guy says, in your example, my son's coming down the road with a strong box and he'll open it and I'll pay you. And let's say the son comes down the road, but he's used the money so you don't have it. Does that cancel the transaction?
No,
can he substitute other money for that?
That means that's a case of ribbis, and you got to be very careful. In other words,
so what's the is the transaction? So he says, "Oh, I don't have it right now. It's going to take me a couple days to get it." Does that nullify the transaction?
It doesn't nullify the transaction, but means now you have to be extremely careful not to. There's a ribbis issue. The transaction is still the transaction. Just you can't pay him back. You have to pay him back less than you would want to give him. Now, you can't give him the dinner and the tracer, the dinner and the extra coin, because now it'll look like ribbis. You got to give him back just the dinner. Just the dinner. It'll be dinner for dinner, not dinner for dinner and a tracer, because you've changed it from a non-ribbis scenario to a ribbis scenario by not having the money. Having the money is what's key, Michael, to nullifying the potential for ribbis, because you're not borrowing. The key word is, are you borrowing money?
Yeah, but it's dancing around the head of a pin, because you're giving him extra in the first place and then you're not. So because you don't have it available right then and there, So it really was ribbis. That turns it to its original stage, that it was really ribbis in the first place, because you're giving him less than you were before.
Well, yeah, but you were mistaken in thinking you have the money. So now that you said, I'm sorry, Yitzchak, I don't have the money, I'm giving you back a dinner, nothing more.
So-
Rabbi, if I have the
Okay.
money in the bank and the bank is closed for a week, and I went and I took money from Michael, and I said, Michael, I'll give you your money back. I've got the money, it's in the bank. I just don't have access to it. My checks didn't come in. I got to write you a check. But I'll write you a check for $5 more than what you're giving me now, but I'll have it in a week.
So Scott, what you are talking about is something that we're going to touch on in the Gemara, a very important concept, and that's the concept of agar nata. Agar nata is a concept where there is a value in delaying payment. In other words, I'll call it the float. I don't necessarily mean it's a float, but the fact that I have an extra week to pay you is considered ribbis. You hear that? The fact that you're giving me a week to make a payment, even if I'm going to give you the same amount of money, is considered ribbis because of the concept of what we call agar nata, the delay in waiting. The delay in waiting has a monetary value, even if the cost of money hasn't changed. But the fact that I don't have to pay you today, I can pay you in a week, that's how subtle ribbis is. Again, I'm just trying to.
But then that would mean that he could pay, if that we determined that on a $10,000 loan, that the cost of the value of having that money in hand for extra week is $5.
Right.
Then if he pays him now $10,005 after a week, that $5 is not ribbis, you're saying.
I'm saying that if you pay back what you borrowed, but you delayed in paying back, that delay is equivalent to ribbis. That's what agar nata
Which means then that you should now pay extra to compensate for it, but that extra
is
to an
ribbis.
outsider would
Is
look like
ribbis.
ribbis.
Right, exactly.
But but really it would be compensating for the ribbis in the other direction, so that there wouldn't be ribbis.
Which is why you can't make that transaction. The bottom line is that if you're going to do this transaction and you're going to say, I'm going to pay you back the exact amount of money, there will be no ribbis here, but I need the week. The week is ribbis. The week that you gave him is the ribbis, and that's not permissible. So in other words, it's
but if you don't have the money, you just can't pay him back now, then what are you supposed to do? If
Then
you
it
pay him
becomes
the
a sale with a
$1,000,
promise to pay.
right? But
Well,
if you pay him back at the right at late, and you're saying now that's effectively ribbis because you had the control of the money for the time.
So Menashe, you can't make that transaction.
But you made the transaction in good faith.
Okay, so you're saying you made the transaction in good faith.
Good faith, and then it turns out there was a problem. The bank's computer systems crashed, and they can't get the money for a week.
So would that be force majeure, or what?
No, so that's an interesting question where you made it in good faith and there was no ribbis, but circumstances caused there to be a delay in the payment, and therefore all of a sudden what was a simple transaction now becomes a transaction with ribbis. That's a very interesting question, and it's a subtlety in the halachas. We have to take a look, because you're right. If the transaction was a regular transaction, there was no ribbis, then all of a sudden something beyond your power, like Michael said, the son came along and he said, "Oh, Dad, I used that money. I don't have it in my box."
Or
Now,
the son got robbed on the way there.
Right. So something that was completely kosher now becomes suspect for ribbis. So that's a really terrific question in all of those circumstances. How do we deal with that halacha? We have to take a look. Really, I have to take a look. What? In other words, it's beyond your control. You meant you had a perfectly good transaction, and your good transaction turned into a bad transaction because of something beyond your control. So, all right. So,
Rabbi, one other point on a bigger level. What I don't understand is earlier when we learned about Peshara, the idea was compromise, amity, working together
Right.
was trumped everything. Pardon the use of the
that
word.
was the goal. That was the goal.
it's we try to strive for that. So these are two people who were working out the transaction, and however they work it out between them, it's, there's amity, there's unity, there's yachdus, and then people come, the Rabbanim come in from on the side and they insert themselves to this to say, we're going to interrupt this. It seems like the antithesis of what we want to do. So can you explain that?
Okay, so you're saying that the two parties are getting along, and all of a sudden the halacha gets in the way. Is that
Right. They make the terms that they want. The guy's saying, for convenience, because you're waiting, I'll give you this. It's an assumed value. It's part of the transaction, and then we're trying to undermine commerce by virtue of infusing, something that is not necessarily part of the transaction, but looking for a way to find fault with.
So the best way to understand this, Michael, is to say that in a transaction, in a monetary transaction, no matter how you look at it, no matter what the terms are, the terms at the end of the day, what goes out is exactly what must come in. So that and we're talking about a lending scenario. Let's not confuse it now with a sale, because we'll talk about a sale and whether there's ribbis by a sale in some cases, but let's not talk about that. So in a borrowing situation, what goes out must come in. Two people cannot make up their own facts, because, who's going to be harmed if I give you a dinner and you give me a dinner plus a little bit? Even privately, without anybody knowing or seeing, or Maris Ayim, the Torah says don't engage in that kind of transaction, because that transaction is not appropriate. It's ribbis. So having stated the obvious that whatever goes out must come in, you can't really say that two people can come to their own agreement, and then now the rabbis or Torah, but even the Chachamim can't come in and sort of upend that agreement. Why are we upending an agreement that two people agree to? The answer is because they agreed to an agreement that was not appropriate. In other words, when two people innocently say, we're good friends, but I'm going to lend you this and you're going to be paying me back this, and that payback is ribbis, the Torah has to step in and say, you can't do it, even though you're good friends and you mean the best. You can't do that, because not only Maris Ayin, but that is classic ribbis. So notwithstanding,
but maybe it's not, Rabbi. Maybe it's, take the example that was just given, which is a great example. Let's say so there's time lapse in between, or it changes, and they agree that amongst themselves that the value of that is an extra coin because there's a delay, and they agree between themselves that that's the value of it. So it's part of a deal that's exchanging value for value because of the delay. Is that ribbis?
No, Rabbi, isn't it just the fact that you're borrowing money or whatever it is? That's the amount you take. That's the amount you give back. It doesn't matter if it's a day. It doesn't matter if it's a month. If the price goes up, well, you lent the money to him, and you can't make a profit off it. And it's simple, really.
Yeah, except that you would think that that's the case, David, but there is a wrinkle which the Chachamim threw into ribbis and said that the delay in making payments, even if it's the same dollar amount, also is treated as ribbis. So in other words, as an example, I'm a merchant and I'm going to want to sell you an item, and I say to you, if you pay me such and such as a discount, and then wait 30 days for me to give you the item, then that has the appearance of ribbis, because of this theory of agarnata, the passage of time has to be calculated into the ribbis quotient. it's kind of against the grain. It's against what we would normally think is appropriate commerce. But the Torah is telling us, or the Gemara is telling us that the rabbis, not the Torah, that the Chachamim have said you have to be so scrupulous in your dealings with other people when it comes to lending money, that if you give him an advance and that advance causes a discount, that discount can be treated as ribbis. It sounds, I mean, astounding, but that in fact is the case. So now, you know, if
it's ribbons, you can't give it to him. That's all there is to it.
That's
so
right.
So that he has to bear that burden. That if I lend you the money and it's a month or whatever it is, I can't get any profit off it, and that's all there is to it. So we're going into an agreement. I understand that I'm giving you the money. You understand that you have to give it back. If it goes up, it goes up. It's my loss. It's a favor that I'm doing. The same way, if it goes down, I still am obligated to pay you the amount that I borrowed from you. So it's not really a monetary amount when you're looking at it that way. It's you're borrowing and you're returning, and that's it. You're not making a profit from it. That's all.
So you're right when it's money for money, but if it's money for merchandise, remember, ribbis is in merchandise, not in money. You're right. If it's money for money, there's no ribbis. I agree with you 100%.
That's what we're talking about right now, because when Michael was bringing up the fact with the money, we're talking money for money. We're not talking about coffee for, a pound of coffee or a pound of salt or whatever it might be for money. Right now, the conversation we're having is money for money.
It's an exchange transaction. It's Khalifin.
Okay, so now you hit the magic word, because now if you're going to treat it as Khalifin, there's no ribbis. That's where this Gemara is going, by the way. So you really sort of hit the jackpot here, because if it's money for money in the form of a loan, then you got ribbis. But once we say the word Khalifin, that this becomes an exchange, Khalifin has no ribbis. There's no ribbis in Khalifin. It's only ribbis in a monetary transaction that involves, let's say, lending. But once Khalifin, where you couch that transaction not as a loan, but as Khalifin, then there's no ribbis. And that's exactly what the Gemara wants to actually come to now, is to push the point that, wait a minute, you're going to tell me that if you have the money in your strong box and it's just a question of payment, then there's no ribbis. If you don't have the money, it's ribbis. But wait a minute, if you say to me that money cannot be used for Khalifin, then even when you have the money, there should be ribbis. Because the only reason why when you have the money it's not ribbis is because you would do a kinyan Khalifin, and a Khalifin there's no ribbis. But if you're going to go ahead and tell me that there is no that money cannot be used in a Khalifin exchange, then you have a problem that even when you have the money in your strong box and your son opens it up and gives it back, then you have the danger of Khalifin, the danger of ribbis, because there's a benefit to getting the money. So that's exactly where the Gemara is going. That's what makes it complicated, Michael. But let's just break it down. When you have a monetary transaction, the Gemara is telling us that in a monetary transaction, you have to be, let's say, midrabanan, you have to be scrupulously careful that what's going out is coming in. There can be no sort of difference in the amounts. What's going out is coming in, zehu. That's number one. Once you have that, then you have the basic covered. What I introduced, which we'll have to talk a little bit more about next week, is the idea is that not only is the same amount going out and coming in, but if what goes out and comes in doesn't happen relatively close to each other, then you have this problem, what I call the aganata problem, is that time creates a ribbis issue. So not only is there a ribis when you and I are transacting and I'm lending you something, you're paying me back more, which clearly is ribis. But if you're paying me back the same amount, but I give you an extra week to pay me, then this extra week becomes a ribis factor. And there the Rabbanan saying you can't do that because then you're benefiting not in money, you're getting the same amount of money, but you're getting time. And time is ribis. That's
And Khalifin can't cure that. Can Khalifin cure that?
Yes, Khalifin can cure that if we're saying it's a Khalifin and not a loan. Remember, the magic words here are a halva, a loan. If you're saying it's Khalifin, all bets are off. There is no ribis. There's no ribis in Khalifin. That's what the Gemara is trying to come to prove, is now I'm going to prove to you that money does have a factor in Khalifin, because if you use it for Khalifin, there's no ribis. So in other words, the very fact that there is a change in the stature of ribis shows that if you have money, it can be used in Khalifin and avoid ribis. That's exactly the point of this Gemara. Because everybody, all the Amoraim, especially all of them said, no money can be involved in Khalifin. And we're going to give you a perfect example, Esaveh. That was the kasha of where money does have a factor in Khalifin, because we see if you use Khalifin instead of borrowing, then you don't have a ribis issue. And that's exactly what the Gemara is saying isn't the case. The Gemara is telling us, no, money, no, don't worry about it. Money can't be used. We're seeing that money can be used. And if it's used, it avoids ribis. And that's exactly what we're trying to say here. So that's the kasha. That is the real kasha on Ula and all the Amoraim who's saying you can't use money for Khalifin. Of course you can use money for Khalifin, because the halacha is different if you use money than if you use just an item. In Khalifin, there can't be ribis. That's exactly the point. So let's just take a quick look at the language of the Gemara, and we'll see. So Eser of Abba, so he says, Im yeshli mos mutter v'im lav osir. V'isol kedatach ein matbeh nasa Khalifin. But if you're going to tell me that ein matbeh nasa Khalifin, which all of you Amoraim are saying, everybody says matbeh can't be Khalifin, avalei halva v'osir. Then even when he has the item in his possession, it's a loan, and it's osir because of ribis. So why are you making a chilik between whether he had it in the strong box and he's waiting for his son, or whether or not he doesn't have it? He has to go get it, and therefore that is considered ribis. It's ribis either way. So the Gemara, listen, the Gemara says, Ashtik. Ula was silenced. All of a sudden he realized that what he said, basically what all the Amoraim said, is not true. In other words, there is a chilik that you can use money for Khalifin, because if you use it for Khalifin, in Khalifin, there wouldn't be ribis. So all of a sudden he got caught short on his own interpretation by saying, oh no, it doesn't make a difference. Of course it makes a difference. So therefore now Ishtik. So he was silenced. So the Gemara, we'll be able to conclude just by saying, on Malay, so the Rav Ava, who asked the question, says, no, I'm going to get Ula off the hook. Dilma Aidi Ba'aidi Beprutotos Shanu Deleka Alea Tiva. The Aidi Peri. So, you know how the Gemara does, we've seen this so many times where the Gemara gets caught in a difficult situation, and the Gemara says, oh, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about something else. Knows the Gemara.
Yeah.
Right. We see that. The Gemara is trying to modify its own position. So comes Rav Ava and he says, no, we're talking about unminted coins. What's an unminted coin? Like an asimon. We have this in the previous Gemara. So an unminted coin is not money. It's produce. And produce, you don't, in other words, we're exchanging one item of produce for another, so it's not money. So therefore, says Rav Ava, when you do it produce for produce, then that's okay. So in other words, we're not. So Ula said that if you're using it monetarily, that money can't be used for chalipin. No, we're not talking about money at all. This isn't a money situation. It's a produce, so you can't bring proof whether or not money can be used for chalipin because we're not talking about money. We're talking about unminted coins where it's not the value of the coin because it's like a quarter. It's like the piece
It's
of
the
metal.
weight of the silver.
The weight of the silver, exactly. So if it's the weight of the silver, then the whole question of chalipin by money doesn't enter. So Rav Abba quickly comes to Ula's rescue and saying, no, my question to you had to do with unminted coins, not about money. So right away, he takes away the question. And again, the Gemara is going to go further in that. But right away, he wanted to defend Ula and say, so let's take a look.
There's got to be a word to describe when the Gemara does this weird switcheroo at the very end of an argument. Say, oh no, it's something else completely.
Yeah,
There must be a word for that.
I don't know if there is, but we find it so many times in the Gemara where the Gemara bails itself out by saying,
Yeah.
you got me, except that that's not what we're talking about. So it's kind of interesting when you learn it and you see it again and again, you realize that among the Amorim of the Gemara, they try to avoid what we call a teku situation, where you find yourself in a pickle and you say, teku, I don't know the answer. So rather than saying teku, we change the facts.
Right.
And we come out with an answer. Now, if you put it back, it is a teku, but we're not going to call it that. We're going to say, no, the facts are this, and therefore, but when you ask me this question in real life, it is a teku. How can Ula say this, this, and this? We see beferish, right? In other words, if we were to take it to its logical conclusion, it is a shaila and Ula. Except the Rav Abba says it's not a shaila because the facts are different. Okay, look, the Gemara has its way, so we're learning that. But that's one of the beauties of understanding how the Gemara works. So let's take a couple of minutes to just finish the Rashi, because Rashi will sort of pull all this out. So this, the second wide line. Im yesh lo bebeso osun mos, that money, shuhu omer, that he's telling he's going to give him, mutter, kosol kadata, the kivin de yesh lo, havalei chalipin. Bingo, it's chalipin because I have the money, I'm exchanging one for the other. The hichlich elu be'elu, osun shebebeso be'ilu, right. In other words, I'm just doing a chalipin. You're giving me this money, and my son is going to open the box and give you the other money, and we're doing chalipin. So there's no question anymore, right? Well, machmas dochko, because of the tightness of the moment, ozel gabe losses like trisas, and because of the dochkos means because of the difficult nature of the circumstance, he's giving him trisas yoser. The ain't kam b'shum ribis. In other words, there's no ribis. He's just saying to him, in other words, when you speak out, what is ribis? Ribis is, in the classic case, I'm going to lend you this money. I'm going to charge you 5%, and it's 5% for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. What's a heter iska? The underpinning of a heter iska is there's no ribis. I'm paying you a fee for the money. You're lending me $100. I'm giving you $105. There's a $5 transactional fee. That fee is not ribis. So when I come to you and I say, you're giving me a dinner, I'm giving you a dinner and a tracer. The tracer is the fee. There's no ribis in a fee. So therefore Rashi says, "Ve'ein kan mishum ribis, shehare ein kan schar hamatana." There's no schar, shehare ein mamtin lo klum. Shaharu paro miyad. He's paying him right away. Remember, time is money. That time delay is a problem. But here's no time delay. It's just a question of the convenience of getting the money from his house, right? The mashmach has mos al shulchani nikdalo hadiner shebebesa b'kol makom shu. So the minute that he does the meshicha on the money from the shulchani, it's as if he paid the shulchani from the money in his house. So figuratively and almost literally, it's an exchange. Okay, it may take 5 minutes, but 5 minutes is not what we're talking about. So it's and for that 5 minutes, he made up a fee. I'm giving you a tracer. That's why when he has the money in his possession, it's mutter. But in lav, says Rashi, If he doesn't have the money, he now has to go acquire the money. Also, then you can't. The kiven the ein lo hadina bebeso ein kan chalipin, no more chalipin, because chalipin means in real time. And since he doesn't have it in his possession, there's no chalipin. El kishar meker ba'alma. It's like every other case of commerce. Shu mischayev lo hadina lo osazman. Betrisif mosalo b'schar ma'osav shehemtin. That that tracer is the schar, not the fee, the schar for the extra time, and that's ribis. So in other words, that's the Gemara is trying to tell. What's the difference between having the money in your possession and not? When you have the money in possession, it's chalipin, no ribis and chalipin. I'm giving you a fee. But if you don't have the money, then I'm going to have to pay you. Wait a minute. Is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? Is it a month? We don't know. We don't know how long it's going to take. Therefore, that uncertainty causes it to become ribis, because you can't just say it's a fee from whenever you pay me, you're paying me the fee. That's not the way it works. The way it works is that by definition, I know it's a term, but by definition, when you're paying somebody back with money that you don't have, that's not considered a fee. Just accept it on fact. It's not a fee. It becomes ribis, and that's what the rabbis are trying to avoid, is to say that you can't do. You can't say, oh no, I don't know when I'm going to pay you, but whenever I pay you, I'll pay you an extra amount of money, but I'm not going to call it ribis. No, that it just doesn't work that way.
So Rabbi, you can't say it's a finder's fee and assign a value to that and pay. You said a fee.
Not under the circumstance where you don't have the money. That's exactly the point. It's a finder's fee, if you will, when you have the money, and I'm going to give you a fee because of the convenience of my being able to feed my guys and then pay you 5-10 minutes later. But once it gets into an uncertain amount of time, the term fee is lost. We don't use the term fee. That's what Chazal is
But if
telling
you
us.
say, I will pay you a fee and I'll give you the money within 30 days, I'm going to pay you a finder's fee of X and I'll give you the money within 30 days. Is that ribis or not?
That's ribis. Yeah. So, okay. So says the Gemara, and if you're going to say that a meteya cannot be used for chalipin, ve'ein mitava nasa chalipin, afilu yesh lo nami ein kinyan lo b'makom shehem. Then even when he has it, you can't make the kinyan, right? Ve'ein ze ela halva. So the punctuation line is that if you're going to say that you can't, the only reason why we say that if you have the money, it's okay because it's chalipin, it's not ribis. But if you're going to say that ein matbeh nasa chalipin like Ula, then what difference is it when he has the money in his possession or not? Even when he has it in his possession, it's considered a halva. It's not considered just a fee situation. Here it is. Kol agar notar le osir. This is the term that I use. That any agar notar, meaning any delay, 30 days, 20 days, any delay is osir in his ribbit. Elalav shemamina matbeya nasa chalipin. Therefore, the flip side is we have to say matbeya is nasa chalipin, the nikna b'chalipin, and therefore, when he has it in his possession, he's tona b'chalipin. The hahocha travaya matbeya ninu. Both of them have a coin. Shel shulchani nasa chalipin. Shel alabayis nikna b'chalipin. That the minute that he gets the dinner from the shulchani, that's chalipin. And then the flip side is that when he takes it out of the box and gives it back the money, and that's chalipin. So you know that proves the point that you have to say that money can be used for chalipin if you're going to make a distinction and say that when he has the money in his strong box and his son just has to open it, that's okay, and that's not ribis, then it has to be chalipin. That's exactly how the Gemara couches it. So that's the kasha. So the answer we gave, albeit a little bit weak, is, wait a minute, we're not talking about money, we're talking about coins. In other words, it's a faceless pruta, and it's just the weight of the money, and that means it's not a coin, it's produce, and therefore the chalipin issue does not come into play. So that's how the Gemara wants to answer it. And again, we're holding in the middle, so we're gonna pick it up. But now you see how this back and forth is. We already, I mean, I'm using the term of Abdul. We already left it for dead. The whole question of whether money can be used for chalipin, we said it can't. And then all of a sudden, now we're back to square one. Wait a minute, money can be used for chalipin, because if you're going to say mutter, that you're allowed to transact if the money is in your possession, that means you're using money for chalipin, and that's back to square one. We said before you can't, and now we're back to square one that you can. So we have to pick it up next week, where the Gemara is again try to give us a different answer. But you see how in this Shakla V'Tari, the back and forth of the Gemara, that what we thought was already over is not over, because now we're back to saying that, wait a minute, maybe money can be used for chalipin, even though we said it with almost certainty that money can't be used for chalipin. But that's the way of the Gemara. The Gemara, it just shows, that's the whole beauty of the thinking of the Gemara, is that when you think now you're finished and move on, well, it says not so fast. There's another circumstance that I have to present to you where maybe it can be used for chalipin. Money can be used for chalipin. Anyway, so that's where we are. So Mitzvah next week we'll pick it up right from here, and we'll see exactly what direction the Gemara takes us.
Yesher koach.
Yeah.